Good morning, Year 10. Welcome back after the, well, it's a long weekend, wasn't it? It was a bank holiday, but I imagine it felt like pretty much every other day at the moment, and that's either a good or a bad thing. By the time you hear this, we might know a bit more about lockdown, but I recorded this on last Thursday, so I didn't know then. Anyway, onward. We're going to do Fete today by Charlotte Mew, another poem, one of my favourites in this collection. But as usual, before that, write down 3 quotations from A Broken Appointment from memory. That's the poem we did last time. As I say, keep these quotations short. If you can't remember 3 from the little exercise at the end, find 3 now that you can memorize. Get them onto a flashcard, and let's get this party started. And then for at least one of these quotations, do a quotation explosion to explore language and structure devices. I'll give you 6 minutes to do that and then move on to the next slide. As ever today with the poetry, it's a mixture of notes in the book and annotations on the poem. Our learning objective is to read and understand Fin de Fate by Charlotte Mew. And the title is Fin de Fate by Charlotte Mew, and it's just the title that goes into your books as usual. The usual run through of equipment before we start. A printout of the poem, which I will be attaching to class charts, a pencil for some first thoughts and ideas when you're annotating the poem, and different coloured pens or highlighters for when we do the full annotation. Now, as ever, we look at the title first. Pay it close attention. Fin de Fate. Anyone who's got any French at all can probably tell us what that means. Finish is the French word for fin is the French word for finish, and fate loosely is the French word for like a party. So the party's over would be a loose translation. And given that, always remember that we're looking at love and relationships, so what might this suggest about the relationship? Pretty straightforward, I think, there. And what kind of tone are we expecting from a poem with this title? Do you think it's going to be sad, mournful, regretful, bitter, nostalgic, reminiscent, or possibly a mixture of all those things? So always have a look at the title and note down there into your books, under the title, write the title of the poem in. Obviously you've got it as the title of the lesson. Write in your thoughts on the kind of tone and what you might expect from this poem from the title. I'll give you 5 minutes to do that and then on to the next slide. And here we are for the first reading, Fin de Fate. Sweetheart, for such a day one mustn't grudge the score. Here then, it's all to pay, it's good night at the door. Good night and good dreams to you. Do you remember the picture book thieves who left 2 children sleeping in a wood the long night through, and how the birds came down and covered them with leaves? So you and I should have slept, but now, oh, what a lonely head, with just the shadow of a waving bough in the moonlight over your bed. Now, that's the first reading. Read it a couple of times, get into grips with its content. It's okay not to understand every word or idea at this point. You're just getting a feel for the poem. So what is the mood of the poem? Who is speaking? Who are they speaking to, and how do they feel? Answer those questions in full sentences. And as I say, these are your thoughts now. We have to start being brave and committed about this. Gloria, I know you have trouble sometimes having faith in yourself. You need to answer those questions in full sentences, and there is no right or wrong. It's simply your opinion at this stage. I'll give you 10 minutes to do that. Now we're looking at the speaker. The person. Sometimes poets will sort of like adopt a character like an actor. I don't think that's the case here. So that's something to think about where the speaker is concerned. Do we think this is a lover who's been left, someone who's been separated from their lover? Maybe their lover's died. These are the notes on the right that go into your book. It's clear that the speaker has a specific intended audience here. So he or she, because it's Charlotte Mew who wrote it, is talking directly to someone. It's a poem written to someone. The poem starts by addressing them as sweetheart, and the references to you and I show that they were formerly close. indicating that the poem is spoken to a former lover. The tone is a bit tricky to identify. Is the word sweetheart genuine or sarcastic? The repetition of good perhaps indicates the latter, that it's being sarcastic. It's forced niceness, perhaps to make a point about how things should have been in contrast to what they are. There's a lot of debate around this poem because people like to debate poems, it passes the time. Most of the debate with this poem is around why the party may have ended, the party being the relationship, you remember from the title, and therefore how that affects the tone. So if you've had like a wonderful relationship but it's kind of run its course, it's always sad when it ends, isn't it? But it's not always bitter. Sometimes you can remain friends, sometimes not, but it doesn't always have to end in a shower of sparks. Sometimes relationships just end, and you could be sad about it, but accept that that's the case. Alternatively, when people leave you suddenly or whatever, then you can be quite angry about it. So most of the debate with this poem is around why the party may have ended and therefore how that affects the tone. Some possible interpretations, these are just some things that people have thought. Is it because the relationship is over? Is it that the lover has died and the speaker feels left alone to cope with it? Which would obviously be two different tones. If the lover had left you, you'd legitimately be angry. If the lover's died, then you would be sad. Is it that they both want to be physically close together but are sleeping apart? Charlotte Mew was possibly a lesbian. She was a late Victorian poet, and famously Queen Victoria didn't believe lesbians could exist, so it wasn't a lifestyle choice that was easy to be open about, or in fact even possible to be open about. And people thought that she might be expressing her unfulfilled desires here, but I mean that's speculation really. Anyway, write those notes into your books. I'll give you 15 minutes to do that. Listen, if these lessons go over the hour, year 10, because I know you've got a lot of copying down and transcribing to do, then please make sure you do it. As I've said before, we need this work into our books for when we get back. So 15 minutes to do that, or however long it takes, and then on to the next slide. Another reading. We'll do another reading now, then we're going to look at a major structure point about this poem. Sweetheart, for such a day one mustn't grudge the score. Here then, it's all to pay. It's good night at the door. Good night and good dreams to you. Do you remember the picture book thieves who left two children sleeping in a wood that long night through, and how the birds came down and covered them with leaves? So you and I should have slept. But now, oh what a lonely head, with just the shadow of a waving bough in the moonlight over your bed. Now that bit that's highlighted there between the two dashes is separated out from the rest of the poem because it's a reference or an allusion. That's something you can put in your vocabulary at the back. An allusion, not an illusion, is A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N. It's when a poem refers to another piece of writing. Now some of you may have seen a version of this when you were young. The Babes in the Wood. The story tells of two small children left in the care of an uncle and aunt after their parents' death. The uncle gives the children to ruffians to be killed in order to acquire their inheritance, telling his wife they are being sent to London for their upbringing. The murderers fall out and the kinder or milder of the two kills the other. He tells the children he will return with provisions, but they do not see him again. The children, wandering alone in the woods, die and are covered by leaves by the birds. Like many morality tales, a morality tale is a story that has a moral at its heart. The story continues with a description of the retribution, that's the punishment, befalling the uncle. In sanitised versions, that's in sort of cleaned up modern versions, the children are bodily taken to heaven. The story ends with a warning to those who have to take care of orphans and others' children not to inflict God's wrath upon themselves. So she's comparing their relationship she's using a metaphor of two children having died in the woods as a metaphor for their relationship. So I think that tells us, so even still, that's still open to interpretation. Is that just because she's angry or because her lover has literally died? Now the beauty of poetry is if you can make a case or an argument for either one of those, then you're allowed to do that. That's what's great about this module. Right, now you understand, or you've got your view on the speaker's situation and the tone of the poem, you need to read through it again, this time with pencil in hand, ready to annotate your ideas. Now, this is a good poem to start having some of your own ideas, people. Do you think this person's lover is dead? If so, find evidence to show that. You know, do close word analysis, or at least think about close word analysis that would support that. Or do you think that they've just parted company? Take a view. Be brave. What can you pick out about how those feelings are presented? What devices does Mew use to convey her feelings? Are there similes and metaphors in here? We've discussed that there definitely are. Bits of punctuation, those two dashes separate out the story about the two children that die in the woods. And always look at regular rhyme scheme and meter. You know how to work out a rhyme scheme now, so work out what it is and decide what impact that's had. Now, you know, for example, it's a very straightforward rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B, almost kind of nursery rhyme like, and it's also got that story about the babes in the wood in the middle. Can you draw any conclusions from that? Give me 10 minutes to do that, year 10, you clever lot. Right, as usual now, I'm going to show you my annotations and you are going to add them to yours, annotating the poem. There you are, that's all on the next slide. So go on to the next slide and I want you to get these annotations around the poem as we've discussed in emails, etc. This bit goes into your books. Mew was said to bridge Victorian and modernist poetry. You don't need to worry too much about that, but I'm sure you know when the Victorian age was, up to the sort of the very beginning of the 20th century. She was born in 1864, I think. And modernist writing came after that. Modernist writing is much more subtle. Don't worry about it, but forget about it, or just don't worry about that. Don't concern yourself. It has an AB rhyme scheme, which is common to Victorian lyrical poetry, but an irregular line length makes a structure modernist. So it's a kind of mixture of modernist and Victorian. Muse is breaking with tradition to present a darker view of romance. The poem has 3 stanzas. The middle section focuses on the literary allusion to babes in the wood, which we've talked about, with a question to the audience, do you remember? This question links back to a shared past with the speaker and shows that time has passed for them both. It creates a reminiscent tone. Reminiscent just means it creates a tone where you're thinking about the past. So you want to copy that into your books, year 10. I'll give you 5 minutes to do that. Okay, and here are my annotations. So just get these in. Don't worry if you don't understand them completely. Just get them into your book. So at the start there, it starts with the word sweetheart, a term of endearment suggesting closeness. The comma following it places emphasis on this address and so hints that this closeness is in the past. And then we go on to grudge. A persistent feeling of ill will or resentment, that's what grudge means, resulting from a past insult or injury. Grudge the score, a metaphor of competition and contest, hints at past conflicts but that it's all at an end, it's all to pay. A door is always symbolic in poetry, it's sort of a close of a boundary. Picture book thieves, when he starts talking about these babes in the wood, a fairy tale with a sinister ending, not the pastoral idyll it first to be, Gothic imagery. Because in that story of the babes in the wood, it starts out beautifully and ends with them both dead. So what does that tell us about what this person may or may not think about this relationship? Gothic imagery again in this stanza, the last stanza. Lonely head, shadow, moonlight gives sense of isolation, perhaps hints of a death or graveyard. So it's actually really dark, isn't it, this poem, once you start looking at it closely. And then again, should, the modal verb, that is, contrast of what should have been, togetherness, to what is the case now, alone. Shorter lines back in present to show separation. So the shorter lines show a slightly more desperate tone to show the separation. The babes in the wood allusion, that's a story, it's all about a loss of innocence, but also reflective, and it's a reminiscent tone suggesting shared memory and experiences. Longer lines in this section, wanting to elongate the memory possibly. Repetition of good 3 times, as we've already discussed, is that being sarcastic? So copy those into your books. I've seen nearly everybody has sent me work now. I think we're only missing one, but there's probably a very good reason for that. And you've all annotated the poems really well, so well done, and take as long as it takes to do that. Right, I want you to make some notes, as we always do at this stage. They must include reference to the speaker and their feelings and perspective. Now, you've probably got your own ideas about that now. At least 3 quotations. Make them short so you can remember them. Some literary terminology. You know, that's simply talking about things like punctuation or metaphors and similes. And points you could make about the language and structure of the poem. And consider the key themes of the poem. It's always the same adjectives here. Which do you think it is this time? Is it loss, pain, desire, longing, nature, distance, isolation, confrontation, reflection, recovery, time, change? It could be any one of, 3 or 4 of those. Now it's time to learn your 3 quotes from this poem that you could use to talk about it. Keep them short, learn them, put them onto flashcards, put them in your revision folder. Well done again, Year 10, and I will speak to you tomorrow.